So before I get started, I thought I'd show off this bad boy to you, the DeLorean from Back to the Future. So I built this a few years ago and built it in parts because I'd receive a certain amount of parts every week for about 2 years. And so I'd build it throughout that period, just adding to it bit by bit. And yeah, comes out with this full model. As you can see, it's very heavy, so I can't hold it for too long. But yeah, it's meant to light up and do different things, make noises and whatnot, but none of that works anymore. So it's just a cool model these days. And yeah, just thought I'd show that off to you before I get started onto this topic of Back to the Future. Welcome guys to another episode of Let Me Explain. So today's topic is Back to the Future and why I think that it is the perfect adventure film. For the few that don't know, Back to the Future, released in 1985, is a sci-fi adventure film starring Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd. It's the story of a teenage boy who gets sent back in time by accident by his best friend, who is a mad scientist, Doc Brown, and basically ends up in the time 1955, which is the time of where his parents were meant to meet, and he unfortunately causes that to not go the right way, and then he has to basically bring them together to make them fall in love again to basically save his future. This film is a timeless classic. No matter how many times you watch it or how far away we get from 1985 when it was released, it does not age a day. It is in my opinion, as I said, a perfect adventure film. Everything about it just captures all the essence of what we aspire to from what we watch films for, but also what we want from our own lives. The film is a perfect blend of sci-fi, adventure, drama, comedy, romance, action, all the genres that you can think of, all combined into this one film. Even westerns when you look at the third film entry, but today we're going to be mainly talking about just the first Back to the Future. When we think of the kind of perfect adventure films, we think of the likes of like Indiana Jones, The Mummy, or even Goonies, those types of films where they're not, like, you could consider films like Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings to be adventure too, but those are more mythological. They have a more deep, like rich universe and lore to them, whereas Back to the Future films are kind of more straight up adventures along with Indiana Jones and whatnot. So there are numerous reasons as to why I think this is a perfect adventure film. I'm going to break them all down today, but we'll just start from the top, and which is the idea that this film is essentially a period piece. You know, it obviously starts off in the 1980s, but spends the vast majority of the time in the 1950s. And the significance of this is that during the 1980s, the American culture, I should say specifically, was experiencing what we would call 50s nostalgia. The reason for this nostalgia is that the gap between the 50s and the 80s represent a very difficult period within the Western world, particularly in America, where you have the revolution of the 60s and the 70s and whatnot. And the 80s is very much regarded as a time of positivity and patriotism and like a return to like American imperialism and things like that. So it was this ideal that they were returning to a simpler time that like the 1950s. And so there was a lot of nostalgia for people to return to that sort of setting and to see films from that era. And you know, there's also the factor that it's a whole generation removed. So kids who were there in the 1950s, who experienced it in their childhood, were now adults who had kids of their own and were kind of reminiscing on their own childhood. So it was kind of a perfect storm of just a setting of like the time that this film was made and the time that they set the film. And I don't think it's any coincidence whatsoever that they chose the 1950s. They really played on that nostalgia that the audience was feeling. And so right then and there, they've got the perfect ingredients for a sci-fi adventure, you know, a time traveling machine that takes you back to this nostalgic era. But now let's talk about the actual content of the film. So when you rewatch Back to the Future, and I've seen it many times, more than I can count, it is phenomenal how much they fit into a 2-hour film. It is basically a 2-hour film, and it's incredible how the pacing of the story, the fleshing out of characters, the development of story arcs and whatnot. But every scene has purpose. Every piece of dialogue has purpose. Everything has meaning. Nothing is just just thrown in there to stuff the time and just drag things out. Everything has purpose and meaning, and it's so clear who the protagonists are, who the antagonists are, and everything in that. And everything has an arc. Nothing is left unanswered by the end of the film. Even though they went and did sequels afterwards, the first Back to the Future film stands as a contained story that has every single storyline wrapped up and explained beautifully, and given the amount of detail and attention that they each deserve. And the film has really great themes. You know, I mentioned earlier about all the genres that it contains within it, that it plays into, but really the overall theme of this film is the idea of choices and making choices and how they affect every aspect of our lives. You know, so you have a Marty McFly who goes to the past and meets his parents when they're basically his age now, as 17-year-olds, before they fall in love. And so he's getting to see them and how they were when he was his age. And, you know, he had certain perceptions of how they were, like they were always parents or something like that. But now he's seeing that they were once essentially teenagers too, who have their own issues and whatnot. And so it's incredible because Marty, yes, he's the main protagonist of the film, but really the hero of the story is George McFly. And it's because Marty has to get George to find his inner bravery and make choices that will benefit Marty's future. Obviously not from the bare minimum, just to make sure Marty is born in the future. And so by meeting his mom. And so it's a whole film about choices and making brave choices despite how uncomfortable they make you feel at the moment. And, you know, the outcome of all that is that when there is obviously the happy ending there, but it results in a better 1985 than the one that Marty had previously left, where his parents were kind of deadbeats and losers. Now they were successful, rich, and all that. And it's all to do with the choices that they made, that Marty helped them make during that period. And this film has great characters all the way around. So, you know, starting obviously with Marty McFly, a young teenager with like a lot of angst, and, you know, he's very energetic and very pushy and all these sorts of things, like all the qualities that you'd find of a typical American 17-year-old in the 1980s. He's got them all, and he's so much fun to follow around. But then you have Doc Brown, who's eccentric and crazy and mad, has all these great one-liners, just great main characters all the way around. And then even George McFly and Lorraine, his parents, they're great both as when they're old and when they're young. They're just phenomenal all the way around with all the cast and characters. And then you get to the antagonist, Biff, who's fantastic. He's the antagonist of the film, but without being the direct threat. Like, he's more used as a crux for basically Marty to measure George's confidence. It's like George, he needs to convince his dad to finally stand up to Biff, and if he can do that, that will change the course of history. And that's how they use him. He's not this direct threat who's really threatening their future, but rather it's the idea that, you know, Biff in the original 1985 is more successful than them, but then now in the next 1985 he's not as successful for them, and he's cleaning their cars and whatnot. So he's really a barometer for how successful that Marty's plans turn out. And when we think of adventure, we think of these grand, like, amazing locations and places and ideas that we could potentially travel to or experience and whatnot. But the brilliance of this film is that yes, there's time travel. He travels back in time. That is an adventure of its own. But really the substance of the adventure comes from the idea of what would happen if you meet your own parents when they're your age now. And it's like, it seems like such a simple idea now, and because we probably take for granted this film, you know, it's been out for so long now, and we have probably seen it replicated in other films and whatnot, but really it's such a amazingly subtle but like so powerful thing to deal with. The idea of meeting your parents when they're your age, it blows your mind when you really think about it and what that would really be like. And the film has so much fun with it. You know, whilst it's very serious, it also makes sure that there's plenty of lighthearted moments to show just the almost hilarity of the situation that Marty is in. So it's when you think of adventure, it's really coming up with a great adventure that's built around substance rather than just showing amazing kind of locations and places and like creatures or whatever like that. It's not about that. It's a substantial story that's an adventure based on family. So to summarize, it's just the reason it's such a perfect adventure film is that, as I said, captures all the genres. It's perfectly paced, amazingly acted. All the story elements are just so engaging and keep you invested all the way throughout. It's just so much of it is just, all of it really is perfect, perfectly done. It's, you know, in my opinion, it's maybe the greatest adventure film. It's right there with Raiders of the Lost Ark. Take your pick in terms of which one you think is the best adventure film, but to me, they're right there. And yeah, I love this film to death. And honestly, they've talked so many times about rebooting this film or this series. you can't do it exactly the way it has been done. The reason, as I said, is to do with nostalgia, and that during the 80s they were experiencing 50s nostalgia, whereas now in the 2020s we are not experiencing 50s nostalgia anymore. If anything, during the 2010s, I think it's starting to wane now, but during the 2010s would have been the opportunity to do a film set in the 2010s where they travel back to the 1980s, because we were experiencing a lot of 80s nostalgia in the 2010s. Seems to work in sort of like 30-year intervals almost. So perhaps now in the 2020s would be an opportunity to do time travel back to the 1990s. Don't know if it would work though, because the gap between the 50s and the 80s represents a massive technological gap as well, whereas from the 90s to the 20s, the only main difference is like the internet. Otherwise, technologically, they're not going to be too hindered in any way. So I don't know how they could work that out. Personally, I hope they never touch the films at all. They're perfect as they are. Leave it. The first Back to the Future is the perfect adventure film. And yeah, that's my full thoughts. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I love Back to the Future and I hope you do too. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. Do you think it's a perfect adventure film, or do you have a different one in mind? Or do you even think that there's a better film within the Back to the Future series, the second or the third? Whatever it may be, I want to hear it all in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. And if you're enjoying my videos in general, please give my channel a subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time. Bye.